I'm very slow to use that word in the recent past. Because who defines democracy? What is it? Is it about the periodic meetings or elections that we hold every so often? Is it equal to governance? Who defines democracy? The question is Africa the richer because we regained independence? The question is, the promises that our founding fathers made to us, have we fulfilled them as we talk about democracy and constitutions? Who brought the constitutions to us? Which constitutions do our traditional rulers operate from? Are they written? For whose interests are they written? As I talk about democracy and development now, I want you to cast your eyes across the continent of Africa now. Look at young people dying as they leave the coast of Senegal. When you tell them about democracy and elections, are you talking to them when they are dying? When they are dying in the Mediterranean, are you talking to them? If you go into a room where there are 10 young Africans, 8 of them want to run away from the continent of Africa, even in countries where there are so-called constitutional governments. This is the Africa that we are talking about today. When you go to Australia, Europe, and America, young Africans are being humiliated. If you doubted it, you only saw what happened in Ukraine when the war broke out. See how Africans were being humiliated. The question that we are asking today, and the question that is alive and well today, and the debate that we ought to wrap our minds around today is, what is democracy? Whose democracy? Is there a possibility that we who are gathered here today, as Carter G. Woodson said in 1933, we are so thoroughly miseducated that in fact, even when we think we are getting it right, we are getting it wrong? Is it a possibility that one of the things that we must do in assemblies such as this and at all times is to unlearn some of the indoctrination to which we have been subjected, so that we may learn things that can help the continent of Africa? How is it that every time we think that we have diagnosed the disease properly and that we have a new antidote, when we apply that antidote, a new wound appears? How is it? Assembled here to remind ourselves that the reason why we lament about Africa is that it appears that the systems of governance that we inherited and that we have been deploying for our benefit continue to put us at the foot of the ladder. We do not complain because there have been no changes and improvement in our circumstances. In certain cases, there have been. But as Uganda's Yoweri Museveni says, and I agree with him, what is the point of fighting as to who is taller than the other when you are all dwarfs? What must we do? What is the nexus between good governance and development? And what is development? I remember Julius Kambarage Nyerere saying in 1966 that when they come and tell us that development are roads and airports, we agree with them. But that is not the end of development. The beginning and the end of development is human resources, Mwalimu said. Mwalimu said, and I agree with him, you can build roads and destroy roads. You can build airports and rebuild airports. But when you build human beings intergenerationally, the airports that you destroy come out of their minds. So we must also redefine what development is. We have seen countries where edifices were christened to constitute development, and they were destroyed in the twinkling of an eye. But the human spirit is resilient and is constantly seeking liberation. The human spirit is constantly yearning for something to fulfill it. And that something is what sometimes we refer to as the social contract. That no man or no group of men who have arrogated to themselves the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom must never ever assume that they are God's gift to man, to govern and rule them as they will. That is the duty of men willingly to surrender their will to men that they may govern them. So the next thing that we must interrogate in Africa is who is the leader? Because we have too many individuals in Africa occupying offices who are not leaders, they are merely misleaders. And the time is now, therefore, to ask ourselves, and I can still remember your now immortal words, Honorable and Excellency President, in 2015, when you said so very ably that your ambition was not worth the blood of the people of Nigeria. When you spoke those words, I do not know what came to your mind, but you must have received a sudden enlightenment, because those words underlined the fact that men must know when to stop and the appropriate time you stopped. And Nigeria was the richer because you stopped. We live in a continent today where every election is a harbinger for chaos. But you said, let it go. We have a saying in Kiswahili, asiyetaka kushindwa si mshindani. He who does not want to be defeated is not a contestant. Today, when we talk about leadership, we are talking about people to recognize that it's not a cutthroat competition. Unfortunately, in Africa, leadership and the quest for it is a cutthroat competition where throats are actually cut. So we must also, in addition to define democracy and governance and leadership, ask ourselves, who is a leader? You know, many years ago as a young man, I watched a movie, which movie has stuck in my mind. It was in 1982. And I went to the theaters and I went with a notebook. And the movie was Gandhi by Sir Richard Attenborough. And at that time, Mahatma Gandhi, or Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, had been invited back from South Africa by one of the great Indian nationalists, Professor Gokhale. And when he was invited to speak, this is what he said: I have nothing to say, but today as I see you here, the people who are assembled here are businessmen and lawyers from Delhi. You are pretending to speak to India and for India. This is not India. India is out there in the villages, in the hamlets. This is not Nigeria. Nigeria is out there in the municipalities. This is not Africa. Africa is out there in Bangui, in Nouakchott, in Khartoum where they are fighting, in Hirda. Africa is out there in Niamey. Africa is out there in Ouagadougou. Africa is out there in Bamako, in the slums of Bamako. When we speak here in English, do we reach them? When we speak in French, do we reach them? When we speak in Portuguese, do we reach them? What is the Yoruba word for democracy? What is the Ijo word for democracy? What is the Ibibio word for democracy? What is the Igbo word for democracy? Give me that word. When you give me that word, then we are beginning a conversation. Because that conversation is the conversation that is going to tell us how we have a symbiotic relationship between democracy and the thing that we call development.